Hello, welcome everyone. We are so excited to have you joining us for our Ember information session on this incredible program that is intended to ignite and sustain a community of equity practitioners and social change agents. And joining us today, along with my wonderful, brilliant colleague, Chris Haig from True Change Associates, is two of our previous participants slash panelists slash upcoming hosts for the next Ember program. So we have Antonio Farias from who's the Vice Chancellor of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Did I get that right, Antonio? Excellent. Antonio is the Vice Chancellor of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the University of Colorado, Denver. And also joining us is Sonia Spears, who is the Chief Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice Officer for the Union of Concerned Scientists. And we are so pleased to have you with us to share a little bit about your experiences being a part of the first ever Ember program that we launched last year in December of 2023 in Washington, D.C., and to hopefully inspire some wonderful practitioners and change agents to join us this October 8th through 10th in Denver, Colorado for the upcoming Ember program. So with that, I am going to turn it over to you, Chris, to talk a little bit about our why. What is the background of Ember? Why are we doing this? And, in your mind, why is it so important for us right now?
Well, thanks, Maria. Gosh,
I took the easy one and I gave you
that's
the
a
hard
lot.
one.
Yeah, it's a lot. We only have, but that's okay. I think, when I started saying, actually last year when we did the pilot, when people were asking about Ember, like what did we want to do with it type of thing, I kind of flipped it and like Ember came to us. Like it wasn't something that you and I and some of our other colleagues sort of birthed, but it sort of came to us, and it came through our work with a wide reach, working with practitioners in our consulting practices who were looking for a bunch of things, like looking for to skill up their knowledge, to learn more, to practice, to learn best practices, to find a community, to find resources, to find support, but also for a space to take care of ourselves, right? To heal, to grow, to nurture. Burnout is so high in this profession. And so the voices of people asking for this just became so loud. And I remember connecting with you about that one day, and you're like, same for me. And it was just like, so like, what can we do about this, right? And so we started doing our research of what's out there, and there's a lot out there, but nothing quite like this. Like what we envision is creating a community for and by people doing this work, right? Where we are helping each other learn, solution, grow, be our best. This isn't a like a certificate program, right? It's not to check the box. It's a community. It's a space of a community. And so we decided, let's try to build something around that. We weren't really sure where to start. So we're like, well, let's start with an in-person session, which led us to Ember last fall in DC. And we started with a small group intentionally across sectors. And to a T, everybody had an amazing experience there, which gave us more data to keep going. And now thinking about how we can create this entity into a nonprofit, created by and for, and developed into a space that you all need, everybody needs, that we all need, which is different than just, like I said, going through a certificate program or paying to be a part of these webinars or something like that. But how do we create a space for each other to thrive? What would you add, Maria?
I think one thing that I would add, and this came up in a recent conversation that you and I had, Chris, when we were talking about this next iteration of Ember, is how often many of us, even those of us who have been steeped in this work for sometimes decades, find ourselves feeling so frustrated and stuck. How do we make a dent when we are addressing deeply rooted systemic inequities and oppression? And it can feel not only overwhelming and frustrating, but also leave us, to your point, feeling kind of burnt out and exhausted and isolated. And I have found myself often facing a sense of inadequacy right? Like, I don't even know if, even when I do sometimes feel like I'm making some small dent, is it enough? Am I enough? Is what I'm doing enough? And what was so profoundly important to me personally in the initial Ember experience, and what I'm hoping that we can continue to inspire as we move forward, is uh, that in building and maintaining this community, we're holding each other not only accountable, but also we're holding each other, providing some grace and some love and some compassion, and recognizing that whatever we are doing to support these efforts, it's worth it.
That's awesome. Right. I want to say one more thing before we hear from our participants, because I think that's the most valuable thing, right? Is to hear what it was like for you all. But I wanted to put out there, this is on our website, and our promo are the objectives. As we talked about how can we be different, and what are the objectives, what's gonna, and actually it's almost more a vision than objectives. And so I just want to flash this because I feel like this, it's our North Star, right? It's sort of up on the screen for a second, right? But I just want to put this into the room. Like as we've talked about, and as we did our research in terms of what people are wanting and needing, it really came to these uh, three big things, right? We want to build a thriving, intentionally, right? Because we sometimes we're struggling, a thriving community of DEI and practitioners and change agents who, first of all, we're steeped in the foundational knowledge necessary to understand the complexities of our work, right? Maybe we understand some and know some stuff, but not all of it. But how do we get more of that knowledge to really understand the complexities? It is complex. It's not simple, right? And then secondly, as we're working to change organizations, we have to skill up in understanding human and organizational dynamics, right? Because we have to adapt, we have to design the best solutions. Again, the complexity. How do we help each other skill up in this area? And then lastly, which is what you were just saying, Maria, I think this is the most important, and this is what most people have said has resonated with them. We want to create a community which is a loving resource for each other, provide partnership, mentorship, coaching, and inspiration to sustain our commitment, passion, joy, and possibility mindset. So these are the things that are guiding us, and these are the things that people have sort of been drawn into with this. As Ember grows, we're not sure exactly. We hope you join the journey to help us grow this. But this is sort of, so far, this is what's guiding us.
So, Sonia, I would love to start with you. And if you could share a little bit from your personal experience with Ember last year in December, what did you find most valuable about this experience as a social change agent doing the work that you do?
Sure. So, as I was listening to both of you talk, there were just words that were jumping out at me, that really, really, were in alignment with the experience that I had. So, the creation, the intentional creation of community of practitioners. So I think being with people who do this work and who understand some of the commonalities of what it means to be in the trenches doing this work, was very refreshing, because you don't have to explain to people, exactly what's happening. There were so many folks that I got an opportunity to meet, who could almost finish sentences in certain instances, because there were these common experiences. But then, one of the things for me, is the community piece again was so important, because this is not something that I have regular access to. And that is something that I very much need. And I think that people who are doing this work very much need in order to sustain them. Overall, I just found, one of the words that keeps coming to my mind is, to describe the experience, was nourishing. It was a nourishing experience for me. In your objectives, you talked about creating an intentionally loving space. And that is so important to me, because if we don't make sure that we are mindful of keeping love as one of the important pieces of this work, and I think that that is very often so absent from this work. It's so absent in the responses that we get from people when we're doing this work. We get a whole lot of opposite of love when we're trying to do this work. And just to come together with folks that are loving in their approach to the work, in their generosity of spirit, in their willingness to chat with you about, what's going on. It was an incredible experience.
Thank you so much, Sonia. I love that word nourishing because I think many of us find ourselves hungry, thirsty, starving at times for that opportunity for connection and to feel that love. Yeah, absolutely. How about for you, Antonio? Same question. What did you find most valuable about the experience in your role?
Yeah, and again, thank you, Maria and Chris and Sonia and Melissa and Robert, for doing this, right? For creating opportunity, for creating space for something that's different. I've been a chief diversity officer now for coming on 20 years. And actually last year I went into the Ember sort of experience burnt out, just exhausted. Uh, I don't even talk to my colleagues who do this kind of work as chief diversity officers, because we tend to end up in these like self-reinforcing downward spirals about how bad things are, and we scare ourselves to death about it, and we come out in a really pessimistic, antagonistic space, right? That is not nourishing, to Sonia's point. And that actually just builds a cancer inside of all of us, I think, physiologically, right? That we're under attack, and it's not that those things aren't true, but we've always been under attack. We've always been sort of marginalized. And we've always tried to find joy in that. And our cultures, right, our diverse cultures show that we can experience joy in the midst of horror, right? But when, as professionals, we only focus on the bad, right, and it's almost like this wound licking, it's exhausting. And I found Ember just revitalizing. And I think part of it was because you decentered expertise. And I think that was the most powerful thing I got out of it. It's like, I don't want to be in a room with like-minded people who have the same titles, the same experience, because we just sort of do the same talk. But what I found at Ember was this incredibly, like, radically democratic process. Titles didn't matter. There were people there that I learned from, students, right? That I never would have engaged with that long on the topic of justice and equity with a student, right, in a professional setting, unless Amber brought it together. Again, crossing like federal, state, government, NGOs, private, public. That is the real, we all talk about diversity of thought, but we all get caught up in our own chambers, and then we just listen to ourselves. So I thought that was incredibly powerful, right? And going back to the words that Chris, flashed up there about the vision, similar to Sonia's point about like focusing in on loving, and I've been thinking about love in a professional setting for years, and I tried to introduce it at a couple of institutions ago, and the students were not ready for it, right? And I was talking about more of like a radical form of love, right? Of like not the hallmarky type of stuff. And the students were like, hell no, we're in like fight, and we want pain, and we want people to suffer on the other side who are not on our side. And I get it. I was that way too when I was like 18, 19 years old, right? So it wasn't the right time, or it wasn't the right place. So, but this concept of like a radical form of love, right? What does it mean, right? We have like leaders throughout all of our justice movements who've talked about love, right? In a very practical, like hard way, because it's hard work. And the other day I was looking at Maslow's sort of self-actualization process, and one of them is love, right? It's like you have to have that in order to move to the next level of community. And we don't talk about that in higher education in particular. Like love, that's weird, right? We code it differently. We code it as belonging, right? And belonging is fine, right? But it's still this like amorphous cloud that doesn't get down to the it. And I think us being uncomfortable with using the word love in a professional setting, I think is radically inclusive and part of what Ember is about. So I'm super excited about what's next for Ember. Again, for me, I walked out of DC on that plane and I felt like, okay, I had the energy, my batteries were recharged. I was ready to get back into the grind. So thank you, because it was a very worthwhile experience. And I almost didn't go because I think I mentioned it earlier, I'm in that old man mode of like I'm on the stoop. I'm like, why do I want to get up? Why do I want to travel? But I was like, no, I trust Maria. I've read her book. It's incredibly practical. This is not the same cookie cutter thing. Let me go try it. And I'm super sold on the experience. So thank you.
I thank you both for what you just put out there. Just, there's the conversation about love too. And you're right, Antonio, if you actually are a student of history and know all about our social justice movements, love has always been central to it. And if you have read all these amazing books, and most of them led by women of color who talk about like the liberatory mindset, right? That means we have to think differently, show up differently, believe differently, have a possibility mindset. And so much of what we get stuck in is what we're trying to change, right? That oppressive mindset we get stuck in, and we get socialized, and we get frustrated, right? And it's hard. I'm not saying this is easy, right? But how do we create a space where we can maintain that liberatory mindset? Because that is what's needed. And how do we get the support to keep going with that? So yeah, love that. So I'm wondering, so thinking about, I want to come back to you, Antonio, because you had such a great experience. You decided, hey, I'm going to host you next year. But I wonder before, I want to know, actually, no, forget it. Tell us your why. You got on that plane. You're like, I'm recharged. You're like, and you literally said to us before you left, I remember this. I want to bring you to Denver. And so what was it about you giving us space and opening your doors to say, let's have another community out here?
Yeah, thanks. And to me, it's an honor and a privilege to host Ember here in Denver, Colorado. I'm not a native here. Very few people are. A lot of people claim nativeness here. It's very territorial at times. It's not a flyover state, right? To use that horrible term, but in many ways, it's not the East Coast and it's not the West Coast. I've lived in both. I've worked in both. And it's almost like a forgotten part of the states when it comes to what's happening. And Colorado is an interesting state. It was red, it was then purple, now it's blue, but it's also very libertarian. I find this place refreshing. I'm from the East Coast. I've lived on the West Coast long enough, but I like the live and let live kind concept here of Colorado. Love the mountains. I think it's one of those things of this is our inheritance. And I think it's particularly for people of color, marginalized communities, they need to realize that the outdoors is part of our inheritance. This was always our land in one way or the other. And yet these lands are seen as like the outdoors are seen as like a white space, whatever the hell that means, right? So coming to Denver, I think will create something for the community you bring here because it'll also it's like it's out there. The mountains, you can see them. They're glorious. They're like awe-inspiring. And yet our communities don't go there enough, right? For regeneration. I go here because I love to trail run, right? I love to fish. I love the solitude. I find myself there. And I want to share that experience. But I also want to share, I have a certain amount of privilege in my position that I can offer, right, to colleagues, to partners that are on the same mission, the ability to come here and to be hosted and to have a great experience in a core small city that is manageable, right? That gives you the experience that you're not going to have in California and you're not going to have in like New York or Washington or any other place. So for me, it was a no-brainer. This is a very small way of how I give back, right? It's about reciprocity, right? If it really is about love, right, then it has to be like, okay, I can give you something that I have because it's precious to me and I want to share it with you so that you can sort of pay it forward in many ways and so that others can do the same thing. The hope would be that some of the participants that come to Ember Denver say, hey, I want you to come to my town in Tennessee, or I want you to come in my town right in Arizona, and sort of like again doing the metaphor that you used really sort of succinctly while in DC, right? This ember, like light these sparks around the country. And that way we can become a bigger nexus, right? That's the key is like, how do you create satellites? So I would love for Denver to be one of those little Rocky Mountain satellites where we can grow a little bit of like that fire so that now we can triangulate, right? Right now we don't have a triangulation. We have DC, we have Denver, or we will have Denver. So we need to keep doing that. So that it's to me, it's easy. It's like yes, it's like bringing family home. Absolutely, it's a no-brainer.
I love it. We're gonna grow satellites all over the world. Sonia, I think Antonio mentioned a lot, and one of the things that we often find ourselves struggling with is um, how do we reach people outside of our echo chamber? And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, you know, what you've found helpful with the Ember experience to support your leadership in your professional life and your personal life, recognizing that maybe not everyone with whom you're interacting is going to be immediately bought into this idea of social change and social justice.
Yeah, I mean, so I think one of the valuable pieces of Ember for me also was this opportunity to have community built in a different way that's not a seminar, that's not, a workshop. So and important for me because I am naturally introverted. And so, having this space that I could tap into, was amazing. And so going into it, I was excited about it, but also very curious about what this would be like and how it would be different in order to make those kinds of connections and, and how it would support my work. And I found 100% that, the folks that I was able to speak with, I mean, the format of it, I think was great because I had the opportunity, we all had the opportunity to move around and meet different folks and really have some deep dive conversations. It wasn't surface level. I mean, to Antonio's point, there was not, nobody's expertise was on display or, things like that. There was always something to learn, a new perspective to see through the eyes of the folks who are also coming together for this purpose. And, I think that Ember needs to be, it needs to be just the idea of these sparks all over the place. And just the warmth that comes with that, when I think of the sparks of Ember and the way that I experienced it also is that my wheels were turning when I was leaving. I was also, like Antonio, energized when I left there. I felt okay, I can do this, I can go into my workplace and keep moving. There's the possibility that things can happen and that this work that I'm doing is making a difference. Those kinds of things were there. It was not only the warmth, but the igniting. So the impetus, the energy that we all talked about burning out. This Ember is burning, bright, which is the difference. And I just love that shift. And so for me professionally, being able to have other folks who strategize and think about these things from a different angle helped me to sort of broaden the way that I think about certain things, but also it affirmed, some of the things too that I was dealing with and that I was not, just off on some limb and just alone in my experience. Antonia was actually one of the people in our small groups, and we went through this peer coaching process, which was extremely valuable. I still think about it often. And the feedback that folks gave, which was coming from a place, of such care and consideration, not surface level. It was just so genuine. And those are the kinds of experiences professionally, which are not necessarily, status quo in how we do this work. And I think that this is why it was so refreshing.
Yes, thank you for sharing. And I am so happy to hear that the peer coaching element was something that has really stayed with you. I personally have found such incredible value every time I've experienced peer coaching in that way. Just being able to have people who are bringing a deep level of compassion and uh, and a willingness to sometimes hold the mirror up to me and say, this is what you may not see that I see, that I think might help you to get unstuck or to start to shift your approach in a way that's going to be more beneficial. So I'm glad that really stuck with you.
100%.
So question for both of you, whoever wants to take it, but I think one of the things that people are probably wondering is Ember for me? Considering this is a 3-day commitment, right? In person and a monetary commitment as well. And there are so many different events and training programs and certificate programs, to Chris's point earlier, that people may be wondering, what would be the value that I gain? What would be the reason that would cause me to choose Ember perhaps over other opportunities for that learning? And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about who you think is going to gain the most from Ember, not necessarily just in terms of like job positions, right? But the mindset, the journey that people are willing to go on.
Yeah, let me start and just say that I didn't initially. I thought, I don't need this, right? Again, I've been doing this for 20 years. What can I learn? Like, the reason I don't go to my own national conferences for chief diversity officers is because it's like we do the same thing over and over again, and I'm like, what am I going to learn? And there's also a level of posturing that I just don't like, right? So I think if you think you're an expert in the field of diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and you know it, you've got it down cold, then you need to come. And not because you're going to like pontificate, but because you're going to learn and you're going to actually be humbled by community, by real community, which I think is powerful. That to me was the biggest experience, is a level of humility. And I'm like Sonia says, she's an introvert. I'm a super introvert, right? I just pretend to be extroverted. But when I go to conferences or anything, I'm usually like, I sit right by the door. So I know that if the session goes like, if it's boring as daylights, or if it's like blah blah blah, I'm gone in 60 seconds, right? So there was no escape from Ember, right? You were in there, you were in the mix, right? There was no cheap seats. To Sonia's point, we were like mixing it up, so you couldn't like be with someone like, oh, I really like this person. It's like, no, you got flipped around, right? And you had to expose. I think that was the key thing. You had to expose yourself as like an actual human being to other human beings and talk in a way that wasn't jargon filled. I think that was also the powerful way. If you find yourself talking a lot of jargon in this space, this is an excellent place where you can get grounded, right, in community. And we talk a lot about community, right? But it's almost, especially in higher education, community is something we do something to, we visit someplace, right? But it's not something we actually experience on a day-to-day basis. So for me, as a professional, it was incredibly powerful. I mean, there are places like this that have that impact, like the church, as an example, if you're a church-going person, right, where you're mixed with professionals, every sort of denomination is there, right, and you get to experience that. But I've moved away from the church years ago, so I don't experience that. So I'm usually in the professional class with like-minded professionals at the same income levels. We have the same experiences, and this goes back to what Sonia was also talking about, this echo chamber that we get ourselves into. So I think the vulnerability, if you feel like you can't be vulnerable, and it's not therapy. That's the other thing, right? I'm a late bloomer in like going and getting actual professional therapy, but I was like, please don't let this be therapy, because I don't need like just like Jane and Joe's giving me therapy. And it wasn't that, right? It wasn't touchy-feely, because that's the thing. I'm a lifelong New Yorker, and that like, oh my God, this is too woo-woo. Like that was a fear, right? But I was like, okay, I trust Chris, I trust Maria, I trust that it's not going to be so woo-woo that I'm going to be like, I'm just going to put a pencil in my ear. And it wasn't. So it passed, for me, it passed the New Yorker, like on the street. This is not woo-woo, this is really practical in that sense. And just the riff, the other thing, right? What it helped me is also when I came back home. Sonia talked about like also like going back home and it like revitalized. I also loved the peer coaching, right, process, so much so that it was on my to-do list here. And actually, just this week, we launched an equity coaching program for all of my DEI leads, right, in all the colleges and schools. So that team is now going through a year-long process of equity coaching. And the beauty of it is we already had those equity coaching, that certificate was already here at CU Denver. I just didn't know about it. It wasn't in my mindset, right? But because we went through that, like it was almost like a little shock and awe peer coaching process there. I got to taste it. It was almost like a buffet, if I could use that word, right? Of like lots of different things we tried, and they were all, it wasn't like scattered like spaghetti on the wall. It was all intentional, the way you sort of created it, including how you like flowed us in. Because again, I would have been one of those that I'm like, I'm not going to say a damn thing because I don't want to expose myself, right? I got a lot of armor. It's helped me survive. But you eased us in, and all of a sudden we were in the peer coaching towards the end, and I was like, well, shit, I'm sharing stuff that I didn't think I was going to. So brilliant in the sense of the way you constructed it, right? And again, who is this not for? It's not if you're not willing to be open and sort of and engage. If you're not willing to be authentic, if you're not willing to be vulnerable, don't come to Ember because you're just going to create anxiety for the team, and also you're going to short riff the people, the community that's coming together for this. So.
Yeah, I would just say ditto to everything that Antonio just said. And I would also add, I'm going to just talk about a couple of things too that resonated too. So Antonio talked about our approach to community very often being, something we go to or, we engage with. This is about building the community and really feeling like we were part of building this. And I think that that is very important because you definitely see yourself in it and the stakes that you have in it too. And so that was one of the great things about this as well. About who it's not for, that piece definitely. It's not for folks who have as a central part of their practice or like the main part of their practice is that they're collecting numbers and reporting, and that's not what this is. This is not for people who are looking for, again, a certificate or your run-of-the-mill workshop. That's not what this is. This is for people who really, really are serious about a liberatory mindset and building that together, right? Because the liberatory, a liberatory practice involves the building of community. And so that is, if this is what you're about, then you definitely have to come to Ember.
There's no liberation without community. I know I messed up that quote there from Audre Lorde, but you know what I'm talking about, right? 100%. Thank you for that. Gosh, I feel like we could talk for hours, but we should probably move towards closing. So a couple of things I want to pull from what you said, but also gives a little bit more sense of what to expect, right? And so we said the word community a lot. And so that is intentional, right? And sort of we knew we needed to just create a space to bring people together, but we're not going to give you all the answers, because if we knew all the answers, don't you think we'd see more equity inclusion already, right? And so I guess like don't come here expecting the answers, but come to be part of a community where we're supporting each other and building each other's resiliency and hopefully solutioning. Like if we could get to a place where we're holding more of a liberatory mindset and sort of undo some of our socialization and some of our own caught upness in oppressive systems in our mind frame, right? And sort of break through some of this white supremacist thinking that sort of is also a part of our work, right? Can we just create a space where we can work together to maybe think differently, to rise above this static and come up with solutions? Can we learn from each other? It's intentionally cross sector. These bubbles we have is just ridiculous, right? And so how can education learn from government, can learn from corporate, right? That's intentional. It's intentionally small. So there is no place to hide. This is not a conference. These are not lectures, right? It is, think dialogic. If you show up, you're in it, right? And so it is workshopping. It's dialogic. We're going to talk with each other. We're going to have some small group and some large group work. Yeah, and I think the last thing I'd say too about what we're trying to create here is that Maria and I and other folks working on this, we don't know exactly what we're trying to do here. We just know we have to try to do something. And so this is why we want to build this community to help us create it. And something that we talked about from the get-go, I don't know if y'all remember on day one, Sonia, Antonio, was this idea of a community is not just what I get from it. It's what I give to it as well. So we want you to come with that mindset of give and get, right? And so, Antonio, that's a perfect example. You're like, I need to give back, and so I'm going to host y'all. I have the privilege to host y'all, right? And so how do we give? What do we get from this community that helps us sustain and builds towards solutions? And what do I give so that we, as a industry, you know, as all these practitioners are growing and growing and growing and being supported, it can't do it alone, right? Liberation is done in community. So that's a little bit about sort of a little bit of the what to expect kind of logistics wise. Maria, take us home.
So in terms of gives and gets, huge thanks and appreciation to Sonia and Antonio for giving your time and your wonderful insights into the experience. Hopefully that as this is shared out with people in our networks, they can get a flavor for what this experience is going to be about. And just by way of some next steps, if anyone who is listening to this is interested in joining us for the upcoming Ember program at the University of Denver, Colorado, it's October 8th through 10th. And there is more information that you can find, as well as a link for registration at www.msmglobalconsulting.com. So now that we got that out of the way, also feel free to reach out to either Chris or myself through LinkedIn, through any socials, through our emails. You can find either one of us. And if you have any more specific questions, we are happy to answer them. We are looking forward to not only this upcoming program and programs to come, but also the ongoing evolution of this community, because the work's not going away. And the more that we can care with and for one another, the more likely we are to make significant progress. So thank you all so much for your time. And we look forward to hearing from you more. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.